All right, so I think I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So once again, welcome everyone for joining us tonight. So I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Faluke Nunn, and I am a community organizer with the Atlanta Economic Justice Program of AFSC, based in Atlanta. And I am here with two guests, Becky Scott and Rachel Johnson. Becky and Rachel, can you all introduce yourselves?
I'm Rachel Johnson. I'm an organizer and advocate of people that live in low-income housing and have a group online called Faces of HUD Housing.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Becky, you can go ahead.
Hi, I'm Becky Scott, and I am a tenant at Memphis Towers, which is a Millennia property.
Fantastic. Thank you both. And so before I go into a little bit of background behind why we're doing this live stream, I just want to let folks know that if you need captions, you can put those, you can turn those on. And then we also have translation enabled if you need that service as well. And at the end, there will be a Q&A that you will be able to use, and you'll be able to use the Q&A feature, which should pop up for that. So why this live stream? So right now we're live, but this will also be posted online. We wanted to do an updated live stream because last year we did a stream when the campaign was just taking off and a few tenants started to find it. So we felt that it was important to do an updated live stream to provide folks with more current information. So if you're a Millennia tenant watching this in the future, after it's been posted online, then welcome to you as well. And I hope that this can be a first step in your effort to fight back. So what is Millennia? So Millennia is an affordable housing owner, manager, and developer that's based out of Ohio. They own and manage about 30,000 units across 26 states. And the reason why we're talking about them today is because they have a clear track record of mismanagement. So they neglect maintenance in many of their units. They do not provide adequate security. They have poor or incomplete record keeping, which often leads to consequences for tenants. Tenants who attempt to organize against them face harassment and retaliation. And Millennia also has a failure, well, they repeatedly fail to pay their contractors. This is something that a lot of folks have spoken about. I've spoken with a lot of tenants who have heard this from contractors. These are a few reviews by contractors of Millennia that are from the website levelset.com, where contractors can speak about their employers. Folks are saying that it takes forever to get paid. This one person is owed $6,000 by Millennia. Another person says they don't pay their bills and make nothing but excuses for why they don't pay. Someone else emphasizes that this is not an occasional occurrence, it is pattern and practice for the company across the board. So last year, Millennia's negligence led to tragic consequences. There were 5 Millennia tenants who all perished in their apartment complexes within 6 weeks of each other. And their names are Kendra Tate, Deshandra Tate, Aloise Childs, Kenneth Jackson, and Wanda Watts. Deshandra and Kendra were tenants of Sunset Village in Cleveland, Mississippi, who died due to a carbon monoxide leak. And Miss Watts, Mr. Jackson, and Miss Childs were tenants in Shorter College Gardens apartments in North Little Rock, Arkansas, who died in a fire thought to have been started by a gas leak. And these are all people who would still be alive if Millennia had addressed the gas issues that tenants in both complexes had attempted to report multiple times. So this is why this campaign exists, so that this does not continue to happen. And I don't doubt that there are many more tenants who have perished in their units as a result of Millennia's actions. And our hope is that this campaign will be successful before more tenants have to lose their lives. So some important context before we continue. Back in 2016, HUD forced a company called Global Ministries Foundation to sell its portfolio to Millennia, and Millennia promised to redevelop those complexes. Global Ministries for many years had allowed the properties that it owned to fall in deeper and deeper into disrepair, and eventually HUD made the transfer, and the goal was that, okay, Millennia comes in, Millennia redevelops them, and the residents are able to live in safe and sanitary condition. And so the complex that kicked this off was Eureka Gardens, which is now called Valencia Way in Jacksonville. And I'm going to hand it over to Miss Rachel Johnson to talk about Eureka Gardens and talk about how this story of Eureka Gardens as a success story of Millennia is not the full truth.
Okay. So I'm Rachel Johnson. I'm an independent organizer, and like I started in organizing by my mom, who's like my first teacher to organizing. And so just fast forward, I think that it's so important to understand what has happened in our past to get you to this point. And so the history of how it got started and some of the different steps that were taken is so important, because it's like a passing of the torch. It has to go through different hands. And so in speaking about Eureka Gardens, I was the organizer who, as an independent organizer, I was looking for properties that were troubled or potentially troubled. And in looking at the HUD list of troubled and potentially troubled housing, this is how I found Eureka Gardens, and this is how it got started. I reached out to Tracy Grant, who was the president of the resident council at Eureka Gardens, through way of newspaper article. And just really just wanted to try to lend a helping hand with her to organize the resident council. There was a lot of fearful tenants. And so just to fast forward, there was an election happening. Marco Rubio came to the property. The then Secretary of HUD, Dr. Ben Carson, was there. Another Congressperson, Tim Scott from Carolina, was there. And these people coming on the property made Tracy Grant think that they were actually going to do something, And so this got on radar. She testified with the Senate. She was taken there by Marco Rubio. And I just want people to be mindful of how sometimes your situations are used to push people in politics, because she didn't recognize that this was an election year, and that was the reason why he really came to the property, to get the people to vote for him. Okay, so moving forward, Eureka Gardens had all of these issues, and people were dealing with, I think it was water cutting off, no water, no lights, electrical problems. Some of the kids tested positive for lead, and just there was so many different issues that were happening. They began to have medical problems. And so Tracy, being the leader in this community, she just couldn't stand back and just not do anything about it, and just begin to take it and just run with it, pulling other tenants, fearful tenants in, and they started getting some things done. There was nearby people, other people that touched, this property to help lend a hand with this. But just want to be brief about it. In moving through that whole process and her being at the Senate and speaking about this property, Marco Rubio trying to create this bill, which was Senate Bill 3219, which would not go anywhere. This was just a strategic plan of his to make it look like he was going to make sure that these property owners, these corporate owners, would get cited or violated, for violating the rights of tenants, but it never went anywhere. And so now, just to move a little bit further, Eureka Gardens, they did a ceremony, and this was a couple of years ago. They did a ceremony to because they rebuilt, renovated, did some renovations. But the day of the ceremony, I was there, and being there, I noticed that there wasn't many tenants at the ceremony. And I noticed the media, I noticed a lot of people, a couple tenants there, some that spoke. But I wanted to know, like, why weren't a lot of tenants there, the people who lived there? And come to find out the tenants weren't invited, number one. Number two, the tenants didn't want to come because they were still having issues. They still was having electrical problems. So just because you look on the outside and you see a beautiful outside of the building, you just don't understand that sometimes people inside the building is still having some of the same issues. And so I walked around the property and went inside some of the units and talking to some of the same people who spoke at the ceremony so highly of what the building was looking like. They were having problems. There was electrical problems. They had lamps, cords going through the units and going to the bathroom. So the bathrooms didn't even have electrical power at all. And so I was speaking to this older woman, and she's like, I'm just so tired of it. She was the vice president with Tracy Grant at that time. Now, mind you, around this time, Tracy Grant had gotten evicted, okay, because she felt like she was paying a lot of rent money. When her water would go off, they would have to go stay in hotels, and she'd be using her rent money, things like that. And then Millennial at that time was fighting her in court because of those payments. And they kept raising her rent, charging fees and fines, things like that, which was not right. But what happened is they took her to court. The judge said that they had to go back and try to figure out what she owed. But Millennia didn't go back and do anything. What they did is gave it a couple months, and then they went back and just filed the paperwork in court for a 24-hour notice. And that's how she was evicted. So she was like waiting on them to correct the rent amount, to give the correct rent amount, but didn't realize the case is still lingering, and they could go in there at any time and evict her, and that's exactly what they did. So she received a 24-hour notice and was evicted. That's what they do. They go after Millennial. They go after these tenant leaders. So just one more minute. The other thing that I want to say is that in Florida, we're in Florida, Eureka Gardens is in Jacksonville, Florida. There's other properties in the state of Florida also that Millennia runs. One is Stony Brook, and then there's Cordova Court. Stony Brook is in Riviera Beach, Florida, and Cordova Courts is in Miami Gardens, Florida. I'm sorry, Opelika. And then there's another one, which I can't think of the name of it. But just to think that Millennial, Frank Sanito, in Riviera Beach, went to City Hall. Everybody was against all these different issues that were going on, but still the system still allowed them to purchase all of these properties. And it's really bad. It's really sad. And we got to come together as tenants. And so and I want to give credit to a couple of organizations, National Alliance of Tenants, and then Housing Justice League, because those were some of the key organizations that helped on this journey.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ms. Johnson. And yes, like everything that you mentioned, from the tenant retaliation, tenant harassment of leaders, to the botched repairs, these are all things that happen in so many Millennia complexes, so many complexes that have been redeveloped, experience lingering issues even after the repairs are done with. So thank you so much again for being on to speak to Eureka Gardens. And this photo that you are looking at, this is a photo from the day that Marco Rubio came to the property for the ribbon cutting. So I'm going to move us along. Next is Forest Cove. So Forest Cove is another Global Ministries property, former Global Ministries property in Atlanta. It's huge, it's almost 400 units. And Millennia began managing Forest Cove in late 2017, and then it finally bought Forest Cove in April of 2021. And, same as Eureka Gardens, Millennia promised that it would renovate Forest Cove after it bought it, but the sale took years, and Millennia kept on coming up with excuses about why it was taking so long. And the conditions in Forest Cove were already bad when Millennia came into the picture. So residents were dealing with mold, they were dealing with rats, other pests, unstable flooring. Some people fell through their floors. There were leaks. There were just about every hazard that you can imagine. And during this time, Millennia was a management agent for Global Ministries. So even though Global Ministries technically owned the property, Millennia was running it. And Millennia claimed that it was not being given enough money to adequately perform maintenance. And who knows whether this was true, but what happened was that tenants were just suffering in their units while they fell apart around them. And the situation did not change after Millennia took over, even though Millennia claimed, hey, we're the management agent, there's not a lot that we could do, before they bought the site. So after Millennia took over, residents still weren't getting maintenance and security services they needed just to remain comfortable in their units while they waited to be moved. So to kind of cut through of what's a very long story, eventually residents were finally relocated off-site in October. This is after the city stepped in to make it happen when Millennia was denied the tax credits that they claim they need to redevelop the property. So as of October 3rd, all the residents were off-site. My hope was that we would be mostly out of the woods with everyone off-site, but that's not been the case. So the relocation specialist that Millennia hired to oversee the process has paid resident rents late for months in a row, which has caused some to receive eviction notices. And they have not been reloading residents' transit and gas cards, which were supposed to help them with transportation since many have been moved far from Forest Cove. And many residents have been moved to units that still have significant living conditions issues. So there have been, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. So there's been trouble with the relocation process itself. And the other issue is that there's still a ton of uncertainty about the future because we don't know if Millennia will be able to redevelop Forest Cove. So they're applying right now. They're waiting to hear back on their tax credit application. And so we won't know about that for a little while longer. And if they can't redevelop Forest Cove, we don't know if residents will be able to return to a different development in that area or how long it will take. So a lot of Forest Cove residents right now are under a lot of stress because they don't know, like they've been relocated off site, but a lot of those leases will be ending this summer, or it'll be a year this summer. And so it's unclear whether they'll be able to renew, and if not, where they'll be able to go. So that's something that we're working on here in Atlanta. And I'm going to pass it now to Becky to talk about Memphis Towers.
Right. So I actually have lived at this property twice. A long time ago, back in 2009 and 2010, when it was not managed by Millennia. And we had problems back then, but nothing, absolutely nothing compared to what it is now. So I moved back in September of last year. And this was at the time when the focus of the tenants union, the campaign that they were working on was around hot water, because for about 5 months at that time, there had been issues with the hot water going off at night and on the weekends. And it was causing a lot of problems. It was causing like a lot of unsanitary conditions where people couldn't do their dishes, bathe, clean their houses. And it was causing trouble with the laundry machines. And it was just every night, every weekend, the same thing. And management wouldn't do anything about it. This is at the same time that the building is under major renovations. There's 3 towers. The 3rd tower, which is the one that I was moved into, is the renovated one. The other 2 towers are just in absolutely deplorable conditions. And there are people still living over there dealing with bed bugs and roaches and mold and really bad plumbing issues and asbestos and just you name it. and there's also major security issues in the building, which I'll get to in a minute. But it was another 4 months of just nonstop work and advocacy with the tenants union before the hot water was fixed. And what ultimately happened was we submitted a list of demands to management. When they refused to meet our demands, we went to the media. And then within 2 days of us going to the media, we had a firm install date for the hot water boiler. And it was in fact installed, and we haven't had issues with the hot water since. So now our focus is on security in the building, which is like a multi-layered, multifaceted thing, because we don't have a security guard in the lobby. What Millennia has done in the past is they've hired security companies and they've kept them on through the probationary period, and then they've let them go before they're obligated to pay them. And that's how they get away with never paying for security. And right now there are people who sit behind the desk who are not authorized to act as security guards, who are acting as security guards. Some of them are tenants, some of them are not. And Millennia is enabling these people to run the building when management isn't here. The front door was not able to be locked for a very long time. And then when they finally fixed it before they issued key cards to everyone. So people, myself included, were getting locked out of the building, which is very unsafe in this area. And I've experienced a lot of issues of harassment outside the building. And there just are issues of vandalism and bodily waste in the elevators, and major cleanliness issues that we believe will be greatly diminished with the presence of security and doors that lock. And so that's the big campaign that we're working on now. And we've had like the standard Millennia retaliation tactics against tenant leaders. We've had people being given false charges on their account. And we have had people be threatened with eviction with no basis, with no grounds at all. So we've kind of seen it all here. And so our big campaign that we're embarking on right now is about security.
Great. Thank you so much, Becky. And thank you again for your commitment to the fight as well, and to motivating your neighbors to push back against what you all have been experiencing. So how is Millennia able to get away with this? The short answer to that is because HUD allows it. So first, the systems in place to monitor compliance are weak. So for example, the REACT system that HUD uses to conduct physical inspections of properties, there are many properties with passing inspection scores that still have critical issues. HUD is in the process of reforming the scoring system. So we'll see if any changes come from that. But that's a big piece of why Millennia is able to get away with this in many cases, is because you look at the REACT scores of some of these properties, you might think that they're doing pretty well when that's not the case. Also, HUD refuses to use all the tools that it has at its disposal to address landlords who fail to keep their properties up to standard. So HUD has the ability to set up receiverships, impose civil money penalties, transfer the contract, just as a few examples. But it's refused to do this in the case of many Millennia properties. And then on top of this, when certain issues are brought to the attention of local HUD officials, they're often dismissed, or they don't put the necessary pressure on Millennia to get answers or resolutions for tenants. And so this is that last point is a big part of why a national approach was necessary and important and is important, because HUD has been committed to addressing these issues as they come up within individual complexes, but the only way to permanently solve a problem is to get down to the root, and a piecemeal approach does not get down to the root cause. And so organizers recognize this, even if HUD does not, and there have been many efforts to address millennia from a national perspective. But before I get into those efforts, I do want to say, so this photo that you all are seeing right now, this is from the fire that happened in Shorter College Gardens apartments in, I believe, early October of last year, that took the lives of 3 tenants. So here are a few of the past efforts to address millennia from a national standpoint. So Ms. Rachel mentioned this when she was speaking earlier. In 2017, 2018, the National Alliance of HUD Tenants established the Millennia Task Force to look into millennia properties, and to look into millennia and some of the patterns among those properties. Then after that, in 2021, late 2020, early 2021, the 662 Tenants Union out of Mississippi convened a group of folks who were connected to millennia properties. And that effort went on for a few months, and then things kind of slowed down. And then in 2022, the Millennia Resistance Campaign, so the current iteration, began. So we convened in February 2022. And again, it came out of a need for a national approach, because it was clear to all of us who were involved that our conversations with HUD were not getting us anywhere. And we needed to get down to the root of the problem and bring all of our perspectives together so that we could call for solutions that could benefit all of us at once. So we began meeting in February of 2022, and then in April of 2022, the National Housing Law Project, who's one of our coalition members, sent a letter to HUD that detailed conditions in a select number of millennia complexes around the country. And then as a result of that letter, so that letter contained an ask to meet. And so the campaign officially launched in August of 2022 when we issued our demands, which we will discuss in a moment. And then we met with some HUD staff from HUD headquarters later on in August 2022 to present our demands to them. And so now I'm going to, well, actually, sorry, before I hand it over to Becky, these are a few of the complexes that are represented in our coalition. So Atlanta, South Florida, Memphis, Kansas City, North Carolina, New Orleans, and Cleveland, Mississippi.
So the list of demands, number one, a national investigation into millennia properties and other problem owners with a pattern of failing to maintain HUD housing. I was afraid of this. Is that rightfully failing to maintain HUD housing? HUD currently deals with poor housing conditions in a piecemeal, building by building manner. Millennia's actions serve as an sorry, I'm having issues with the Braille display that I'm using.
You're good. You take your time.
Okay, I'm going to start this over. A national investigation into millennia properties and other problem owners with a pattern of failing to maintain HUD housing. HUD currently deals with poor housing conditions in a piecemeal, building by building manner. Millennia's actions serve as an example of why that is problematic. HUD OIG needs to conduct a national investigation to reveal the root causes of poor conditions within HUD's project-based Section 8 portfolio, with a specific focus on disparities in property conditions by race, national origin, and familial status. HUD also needs to investigate and evaluate what policies permitted one company to take over management and or ownership of thousands of troubled units across the country. Number 2, HUD must increase and improve its oversight and enforcement of its condition standards to ensure it is providing decent, safe, and sanitary housing to families. It is unconscionable that tenants who live in housing created and supported with federal dollars continue to face terrible housing conditions. HUD must improve its oversight and enforcement of conditions standards, and that begins by providing tenants with an active role in the inspection process. It also means that HUD must utilize existing tools to address poor housing conditions when owners fail to comply, including the issuance of civil money penalties, transfer of the Section 8 contract, suspension or debarment, receivership, and requiring the owner to secure new management. HUD should also extend to project-based Section 8 tenants the same right public housing tenants have. I think that's supposed to be rights. The same rights public housing tenants have to abate their rent or to move if their housing cannot be made habitable in a reasonable period of time. Additionally, HUD must take an immediate additional enforcement action following the expiration of the compliance period listed on the notice of default / notice of violation. Number 3, make Millennia tenants whole. Tenants in Millennia properties have been forced to use their own limited resources to maintain their unit, pay for injuries and medical care related to injuries caused by the poor housing conditions, and expenses for hotel stays and other moving expenses when the conditions become too hazardous. Tenants shouldered these expenses because of HUD's failure to hold Millennia accountable. HUD should have to reimburse tenants for these costs. Sorry, this is really difficult to read on here. For these costs, or direct Millennia to cover these expenses.
Becky,
Yes.
if you'd like me to take over, I can also do that.
Yeah, sorry. I didn't realize how cumbersome this was going to be to read it on this thing.
Yeah, no worries. No, I appreciate you though. I know. I know you. I think that I appreciate you being willing to to try it out for us though.
She did a great job though.
She did do a great job.
Great
Thank
job.
you.
Yeah. But so I'm gonna take us through the rest. So yeah, so as Becky said, demand 3 was reimbursed Millennia tenants for out-of-pocket expenses because a lot of folks pay for a lot of folks need to pay for childcare, medical bills, and other expenses that are related to the fact that they do not have safe and stable housing. Provide safe and affordable housing choices to displaced tenants. So a lot of tenants end up homeless because they move out on their own. And we would like for them to be provided with some sort of alternative housing so that they don't end up on the street, because speaking for Atlanta, there aren't very many affordable choices in the Atlanta area, which is why when Forest Cove tenants were relocated, they were relocated to all corners of the city, because the city itself has an affordable housing problem, and the tenants who moved out of Forest Cove before the relocation process often end up permanently displaced. And that's not fair for them to have to go through that when it's the fault of Millennia and Global Ministries for making the complex fall into such a state of disrepair that it becomes unlivable. So next is honor the demands of local tenant associations. So a lot of associations have a set of their own demands, as Becky was going through earlier, with the hot water and the security and the better record keeping. So we want to make sure that those demands are met. And next, including tenants and tenant associations in decision-making about the future of their housing. So want to make sure that tenants feel good about what's going to happen, whether that's renovations or if there's a transfer of ownership. Want to make sure that tenants have a say in what goes on. Protect tenant rights to organize, because as we've said before, Millennia has a track record of retaliating against tenants for organizing. So we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. And finally, we're asking that HUD meaningfully fund resident organizing activities. Great. So now I have a few, we're going to talk about why it's important for tenants to organize. So Millennia tenants may watch this, and then it's also possible that tenants of other bad landlords may find this. And so when dealing with a bad landlord, many folks' first thought is to call code enforcement or legal help, but organizing done well can do much more to solve the problems that folks may want to solve. So we want to have a conversation about that. So I have some questions for Becky and for Ms. Rachel. And so I'm going to start, we can start with Becky and then we'll go back and forth. So the first question is, why did you decide to begin tenant organizing?
Well, I was directed to the tenants union here at Memphis Towers not long after I moved in, because I was experiencing some issues that had to do with lack of security. And so I learned about the efforts that were already underway here, organizing against Millennia. And I have almost 13 years of like community organizing and social justice organizing experience. And so I just thought that this was a fight that I should be involved in and that I should bring my skill set to, so that I could help fight for better conditions for everyone at this property.
Great. Thank you, Becky. What about you, Ms. Rachel?
Why organize? It's to save your homes. That's just plain and blunt. It's just save your homes, and just to make sure that the tenant protections that's been put in place by HUD is enforced. And so we can't do that without you. We can't do that without tenants. And it's so important for you to know the different protections that are there for you. Because I heard in the webinar some things about, it should be right to return. There's a HAP contract involved. So the tenants have the right to return. There's Uniform Relocation Act. So these are things that help you, that provide the funding for the excess of expenses that you have. So just knowing what your rights are, and there's a residence rights and responsibilities brochure that has been updated that gives you all of those things. And I heard you mention civil monetary penalties. Like, go to your legal services, start these lawsuits. Cordova Court has a lawsuit in place. Like, this is so important to enforce. There has been times when resident councils could end up being one of the properties, like selecting the owner, a nonprofit owner, sometimes, and just choosing an owner who's going to, come back and make sure that you guys have safe, decent, sanitary housing, that remains affordable. So you got to look at some of those things, but we need the tenants. The tenants must come together and organize. We know that you're fearful, but guess what? You're stronger together.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Rachel. And so that touched on the next question, which is, why is organizing important for tenants? Becky, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that property management companies like Millennia, they bank on tenants not knowing their rights or the avenues of redress that are available to them, or like the types of advocacy and activism that they can engage in. But really, it's just like any other fight. If enough people raise their voices and speak out and take action, then the people that are committing these horrible atrocities will be held accountable.
Absolutely. And so, Becky, what made you want to get involved with the national campaign against Millennia?
Well, I'm all about strength in numbers, and it's not just Memphis. It's not even just Tennessee. Millennia has properties in half the states in the country. And when you organize with that many people who have that many skill sets and lived experiences and resources, then you have a much, much better chance at bringing them down.
Yep. Absolutely. What about you, Ms. Rachel?
I just like, I remember Becky saying something about public housing rights, when it comes to abatement and all these things. Those things displace you. And so the thing of it is, you got to be looking at the different rules. And so that's why it's just so important for you guys to organize and then to look at the resources that's going to back you. Then all you have to do is HUD. I want to go to Scott Carver projects in Miami, where this happened like 30, 40 years ago. They knocked down the property. Still, they're fighting still today. And they have won. They won home ownership. They won, the right to the housing. And so they had to build. So if you keep at the fight, it may take a long time. Don't get tired. If you need somebody to uplift you, go to that person that can inspire you and keep you going. You know what I mean? So you need each other to help each other. So that's why it's so important to just stick with it. Because even if it takes 10, 20 years, you still end up winning.
So the final question that I have is, so a lot of times, whether it's Millennia tenants or other tenants that I work with, folks are often very afraid to speak out. And they're like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that because I don't want to be targeted. What would each of you have to say to those tenants who may be interested in beginning the process of organizing, might be curious about organizing, but they're worried about retaliation and they don't know if they feel comfortable speaking out? Anyone can go.
I would say first and foremost that under no circumstances can you be penalized or evicted for any form of tenant organizing. It is absolutely illegal, and landlords know this, and they like to make baseless threats. They like to make false claims. Just don't believe it, because they absolutely cannot evict you for organizing and speaking out for your rights. Case in point, we have one of our main organizers here at Memphis Towers has been organizing for a few years now, and they have tried just about everything under the sun to get her evicted, and she's still here, and she knows no fear. She is not scared of them, and she's still here. They're not able to legally do anything to her, and I'm not going to mislead prospective union members and say that like there's not a risk of them trying and there's not a risk of them using underhanded retaliation tactics, because there is. That's what they do. So I think it would probably behoove anyone who is thinking about organizing to like talk with other union leaders and do some research and find out what specific tactics your landlord likes to use, and just kind of make a game plan for that. That's what I would do. And that's what we have these discussions regularly in our tenants union meetings, about what to do if management does this or this or this. So I'm not going to say that there's not a risk, but ultimately the law is on your side and they can't do anything to you.
That's fantastic advice. Thank you, Becky. Miss Rachel, do you have something?
Just to piggyback on what she's saying, yeah, they can't do it, but what happens is if you don't stand up, they will do it. So it's so important, because if the rules, the laws say that they can't do it, you have to have somebody who's going to enforce it. But if they have nobody speaking up about it, how are they going to know that it's happening? So it's so important just to piggyback on what Becky's saying is so true. You know, they can't do it. The rules and regulations show it, and HUD rules say it. It's all in writing for you. Document. If you see another tenant going through something, take out your cameras, video it. It's so important to just have something as proof and what is happening to you guys. You know, it may not happen to you now, but it may happen to you later, and you're gonna need that other tenant to help you. So just stick by it and learn as many of your rights as you possibly can.
Yes, documentation is key. That's probably one of the most important things you can do, is just document everything. Learn about your rights and document. All right, so, oh, actually, I'm going to put something in the chat for the folks who are on Zoom with us. So we created a tenant organizing guide for Millennia tenants. So it's written for Millennia tenants, but the steps in it are steps that anyone can follow. It's just an easy guide to how to organize, how to begin the process of coming together with your neighbors. There are also links in it to other resources that can provide more information about the process of organizing and the process of leading your own campaign, and also about your rights as HUD tenants. So again, I put the link in the chat, and then I'll also make sure that the link is added to the description of this video on the platforms that it is posted to after we're done here today. So I'm going to move us along. All right, so on April 1st of this year, we're going to have a day of action. That's the next step that we are going to be taking as a campaign. And on the day of action, we are asking our allies to call and or email HUD to lift up our demands. Folks who have the capacity, it'd be great to have you canvass a nearby Millennia complex with this toolkit. So another reason why the toolkit was created that I didn't mention before is that we recognize that there are a lot of Millennia complexes out there that have significant issues. And the tenants there just have not been able to get the word out about what's going on there, or they may not know where to start. So we wanted to create this toolkit as a resource for them. So if you're someone who's in a Millennia city and there's a Millennia complex there that maybe has been getting a lot of news coverage, if you're interested in canvassing one of those Millennia complexes, then please, that would be a huge help. And to canvass it and then connect them to the campaign so that we can provide some organizing support. Something else that we're asking for folks to do is to contact their Congress people and to lift up the issue of Millennia and to urge them to put pressure on HUD to honor our demands. And we'd also appreciate it if folks could amplify the campaign on social media. I'm going to talk about our social media accounts in a moment, but we'll be posting materials on those days. And so it'd be great to have folks like them and retweet them and repost them. We also have a petition. I'm going to put the petition in the chat as well for the folks who are on the Zoom. And then for those who, again, are watching this after the fact, we'll make sure that there is a link to this in the description. So if you could sign and share the petition, that would be a huge help. And then finally, if you could attend an in-person action. So we're going to organize actions for like in a couple of cities around the country, and we'll be sending out information on those actions as we get closer to the first. And so what I'm going to do is, if you would like information about those actions, I'm going to find the link to sign up. So if you're an organization that would like to participate in the Day of Action, please sign up at this link that I just put in the chat. And again, will be in the description of whatever platform this video is posted on. Your organization can sign up and check off the actions that you're willing to take on the Day of Action. And then we'll be in touch with you as the day gets closer. And then if you're an individual watching this, we'll also be posting the information on the in-person actions on our social media accounts as April 1st gets closer as well. So to begin to wrap us up, if you'd like to connect with the campaign, here's how you can reach us. You can email millenniaresistance@gmail.com. And don't forget it has 2 L's and 2 N's, because I know that sometimes that messes folks up sometimes. And then Instagram, Millennia Resistance, and Twitter, we're Resist Millennia. So please get in touch if you're a Millennia tenant or an organizer or someone who's curious. If you're an ally who'd like to see how else you can support, please feel free to reach out to us. And with that, would like to see if we have any questions from our audience. So again, you all should have the Q&A feature enabled, so please use that to submit your questions. And while we're waiting to see if we have any questions, I just would like to know, Becky or Miss Rachel, do you all have any last comments that you would like to make? Anything else you'd like to emphasize before we close out today?
Okay, so Tracy just one of the things that she said on the video was that she wanted people to just not be fearful, to stand up, because this is getting to the point that this is not just happening with Millennial, it's happening with lots of corporations around this country. And we got to stand up. And so, even though she went through all these different situations, eviction and, some of these tenants with the lead, things like that, it's just so important just to stand up, stand together. I don't care if it's 1 or 2 of you in the apartment complex, because guess what? When you look at all the apartment units, all of you come together, that's enough. As long as we have at least 1 or 2 people in there, we keep building from there.
That's great. Thank you, Ms. Rachel, for sharing that. Anything else from you, Becky?
I mean, just to kind of piggyback off of that, Millennia and other property managers like them, slumlords like them, have gotten away with stuff like this with impunity for so long that they really do believe that they're untouchable. and I would love for them to be proven wrong. I would love for them to be held accountable to the highest degree possible. People have died. People have died. I, as a tenant, I am constantly concerned about my health and my safety. I don't really feel like I've been able to even start my life here or enjoy my apartment because I'm always in fight mode. And nobody should have to live like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you both. And it looks like we don't have questions, so I'm going to move to close this out. And again, if the folks who are watching, if you think of anything, feel free to, again, reach out to us at our email. I'm actually going to go back to that slide just so that we can close on our contact information. But yeah, just to wrap up what Becky and Miss Rachel were talking about, you'd be surprised at how much you can accomplish if you take that first step to begin to speak up and to begin to fight back. You can't do it alone. You do need the support of your neighbors. And it can also be helpful to have support of outside organizations to help add capacity to your fight. But once you begin that process, you'd be surprised at how fast you can see results. I'm going to just give a couple of examples. So one, Becky was talking about how they were struggling with hot water at Memphis Towers. And after they got media attention, management fixed the boiler within a couple of weeks. With Forest Cove, residents were still paying rent in unlivable conditions. They were waiting to be relocated. They didn't know when it would happen. And around this time last year, we initiated a rent strike and just said, okay, well, we're not going to, the residents said, we're not going to pay rent until we're off site. And Millennia said, okay, well, you know what, we'll waive rents for the rest of the time that you're on site. So again, you'd be surprised what could happen when you begin to push back against them. Sometimes you can achieve the wins that you're looking for. So with that, I am going to close this out. And thank you all so much for your attention. Thank you for watching, whether you're watching live or watching in the future. Thank you so much again. And I hope to be in touch with some of you.
Thank you, everybody.